Far out in the uncharted backwaters of the unfashionable end of the western spiral arm of the galaxy lies a small, unregarded yellow sun. Orbiting this at a distance of roughly 92 million miles is an utterly insignificant little blue-green planet whose ape-descendant life forms are so amazingly primitive that two of them still think doing a podcast called Digital Watches are a pretty neat idea is a pretty neat idea. These podcasters have, or rather had, a problem, which was this. Actually, this is the solution.
Hey, Bryan, what's this?
Jeff, this is the Salmon of Doubt. Well, technically, it's the second half of the Salmon of Doubt.
Or the fourth quarter of, or something like that.
This is our review of the second half of the book, which is primarily a Dirk Gently story.
Yes.
Which was in theory to be attached as the third book in the series. Well, maybe you could tell us a little bit more about what this might actually be.
If my memory serves me, this started as a Dirk Gently novel, got transferred to become a Hitchhiker's novel, then went back to becoming a Dirk Gently novel, and he's done many, many different versions that they've seemed to have taken here and tried to form some sort of a story.
Right.
Best way to describe it is just to read this fax to his editor,
okay,
describing this Dirk Gently novel. Dirk Gently, hired by someone he never meets to do a job that is never specified, starts following people at random. His investigations lead him to Los Angeles, through the nasal membranes of a rhinoceros, to a distant future dominated by estate agents and heavily armed kangaroos. Jokes, lightly poached fish, and the emergent properties of complex systems form the background to Dirk Gently's most baffling and incomprehensible case.
Well, baffling and incomprehensible pretty much sums up the read that we are about to describe.
It does. And one of them is in this fax. It says his investigations lead him to Los Angeles.
Right.
Through the nasal membranes of a rhinoceros. Mm-hmm. So he's supposed to end up in Los Angeles, but we'll get to this in a little bit. They have him on a plane to Los Angeles, but he lands in Chicago. It's kind of a weird, and I think that's where the messed up part came.
Yes.
So, again, he never travels through a rhino's nose in what we've read, but there is a rhino.
No. There is a rhino. Well, that's actually two, technically.
Right. Yeah. Yes, there are. Twice as many rhinos.
So there's, 4 times as many nostrils.
But before we talk about that, I want to talk about our last convention episode.
Awesome.
And how we neglected to talk about the most podcast-related encounter we had.
Is that right?
Yes, we did.
I'm not surprised.
So at the beginning, I talked about how we were wandering before the show started, and you saw Ted Woods. And I got my Firefly cards sketched.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Well, where were we heading when we saw Ted? There was a specific table I was heading for. It was Aaron Reynolds' table of the book Effing Birds.
Oh, right. Oh, my gosh. Did we forget all about the effing birds?
We forgot all about the effing birds.
Oh, my gosh. I can't believe we forgot about that. You know what? Now that I think about it, we didn't even put it. I didn't even have notes in my
No.
list.
So poor Aaron. Hey, we'll talk about him a little bit.
Yes.
if you remember, somehow we got talking about that we had the podcast.
Yep.
And we said it was Hitchhikers related, but we ran out of Hitchhikers material. But we've now transitioned to the Dirk Gently material.
That's right.
And what did he say?
Correct. He mentioned that his favorite part of the Dirk Gently books.
He said, I always wanted a calculator that did a suffusion of yellow for any total over 4.
He did. He said exactly that. It was so surprising, and we were like caught off guard.
And we're like, we just did that episode.
Yeah, we just did the episode, and we knew exactly what he was referring to, but it's such a deep dive, you know, that we knew he was a true fan. Right. How did we miss that last week? What
I don't know,
nuts?
But after that conversation with him and everything else that we dealt with, as we're walking away, I looked at you and I'm like, that was a test. He wanted to know if we knew our material, if we really dug deep into Dirk Gently.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely he did. And you know, we didn't even talk about the cards and the collecting and all the stuff we did with him.
No. So he gets his own little highlight right here at the beginning of this episode.
Excellent.
If you've listened to any of our other current episodes that are recent, you'll know we have a bird problem at our barn. So when I saw somebody was selling a book called Effing Birds, I'm like, I have to have that book. So we went, we met this guy's great guy. I bought his book. I had him sign it and write a little note to my wife because she's the one that really says effing birds a little more than I do. And then I also noticed that he had trading cards.
Right.
But the collation of these trading cards isn't to make sure you get an entire set in a box. It's just purely random.
That was one of the most interesting parts of the conversation that we had with him, because I think this is the first time, at least I've ever had an opportunity to talk to someone who curated their own card set.
Right.
And he told us in quite some detail at the expense that was related to creating these card sets, and how for various costs you could have them randomized at various levels of randomization.
Yes, like 3 different levels.
I know. I was amazed by that. I mean, I've experienced it. Obviously, you and I have been card collectors for years, so we've experienced it from just opening boxes and opening packs and seeing that many of the packs sometimes have related cards in them. Like, we'll open one pack and then 12 packs later it'll be a very similar pack, but you know, not all the cards are exactly the same. And he told us about the process and the costs related to having them randomized and put into packages.
Yeah, so he just decided to go with level 1, the simple one shuffle.
Yep, the one shuffle.
I guess he can also do multiple shuffles. And then the most expensive 3rd level is a collation that guarantees a set in every box that actually has a human element that's checking and doing quality control throughout.
Right, and that's primarily, since we buy expensive cards, that's the kind of shuffle that we're used to. We're used to buying a box and getting at least one set, if not 2 complete sets within a box.
Right. Well, I don't want to say that it's that we bought expensive cards. We bought mass-produced cards.
Yes, that's more accurate. You're right.
Because, truth be told, I believe that is the most I have ever spent on a box of cards.
Oh, yes, when you bought the effing box. The effing box.
The effing box. I bought the effing box of cards and didn't even get an effing set of cards.
No, not a whole set. But what a brilliant approach that you had with your leftover cards and that he offered from his side. Right.
So what he did is he had on the table some open packs. So if people got duplicates in the packs that they bought, they could do 1-for-1 trades. You know, and then that makes it fun. Well, I took and had as complete a set as I could make for me. I made as complete a set as I could with the remaining cards and gave them to you. Yep. And then I had still a number of other cards that I have absolutely no use for.
Right. Triples and quadruples. Yep.
So I was just going to give them back to him so he could put them on his table and people could have fun trading for them because I have no use for them. But I said,
Right.
if somebody happens to trade one of these cards, and I gave him a list of the cards that I needed, if somebody happens to trade in one of these cards, could you set it aside for me since I'm just going to give you all these? And he's like, sure. And I thought that was good enough.
Yeah.
But then what he decided to do, and it helped him sell packs, is if somebody in a pack got one of my cards, they could trade it for 2 of the duplicates on the table. So even if they didn't have an extra one, they could get one more card than they should have gotten with the pack that they bought. So, and evidently he had people buying packs and looking for the card. He made a great game out of it. So
He did.
but I'm still, I think, 10 cards short of the 90 card set, which is fine. And it'll be something I'll never be able to complete unless, of course, I see him at another convention and start buying packs.
Right, exactly.
But he'll have Series 2.
Yes, there you go. And he was able to collect, 4 or 6 cards for the ones you were looking for?
Yeah, I think he got 3, 4, somewhere in there. So that was great.
Yeah, that was fun. Yeah, very, very pleasant man to speak with and very intelligent, and enjoyed listening to him.
Yeah, absolutely. So now we can talk about the last quarter of the Salmon of Doubt. We're going to just start out and kind of summarize the book like we've done for the other Dirk Gently novels. And this one is going to start out with a character named Dave. And Dave is climbing a hill to the shrine of the imaginary Saint Clive, who is the patron saint of real estate agents.
All right.
The shrine of garbage he has assembled was to both amuse himself and to have a place to get away and think. So right now you're just thinking, who is this? What is this? What's going on? And then it gets weird. So from up on the hill, Dave could survey what he called Daveland, which was a community that he created that existed 1.2 million years after the human race went extinct. All of his creations, houses, phones, etc., were smart, where all the others were dumb. He also created the Way of the Nostril. Dave climbed farther up the hill, unpacked a hang glider he redesigned, and jumped off the cliff to glide to his house about a mile away. He wanted to drop into his pool in time for a meeting with Sam. So you read this and you're like, what in the world could possibly be going on to have anything to do with Dirk Gently?
Right.
Because first, it's 1.2 million years in the future. That is, if we killed ourselves immediately. So, I mean, it's not a little more, I rounded down.
And of course, we never know whether he makes it to the pool or not. I mean, his last thoughts in the chapter as it ends is, can I make it to the pool?
Right.
And we never get back to this character or to this part of the story.
No.
So it's really curious.
But because it says here, the Way of the Nostril, and we know from the facts that he's going to go to Los Angeles in a far distant future through the nasal membranes of a rhinoceros, we have to believe that the Way of the Nostril is a rhinoceros's nostril.
Okay. All right.
Just a hunch.
Yeah, just a hunch.
So chapter 2, now we get to Dirk. And he's having trouble getting clients. So his business is kind of slow.
Yep.
The only recent client he's had was a woman who forgot the name of her dog after suffering a bump to the head.
Right.
And she knew she forgot the dog's name because the dog would not come to her when she called it, which is like every dog. So I don't think the name was the problem.
No, I don't think so.
She could not ask her husband what the dog's name was because he died in a bungee jumping accident. And she wanted Dirk to figure out what the dog's name was.
And I thought Dirk actually had a clever way of figuring it out, which we'll get to in the next chapter, I believe.
way down. It's almost the last chapter.
Oh, really? Well, that's when he actually figures out the name. But it's during the next chapter that he's sitting in his office, and they keep saying, and the slightly, what the heck does he say? The slightly Swedish guy says, Jerome, Jessica, Jonathan.
Yeah, he had something on there that was just saying names.
Right. He was trying to use that method to learn the dog's name. Because if the dog responded to any of those names, then he would know it.
Okay. So
he was, trying to determine the dog's name by having the dog listen to hundreds of names and then see what he responded to.
Okay, well, good. We get to argue about that method and its stupidity because, well, it's only people names.
Yeah.
Why does he think the dog has a person name?
Most of them do.
No, they don't. Spot? Yeah. Jellybean? Is Jellybean and Dart?
Just because
yes,
you're weird doesn't mean the rest of the world is. That's what he was doing, though. It makes perfect sense. Although you're right, it could have been a name that they would not have used.
If it was trying to find the name of a person, not an animal.
That's what Dirk's assuming at that point.
But that's not his method. His method isn't to sitting down and playing a recording of somebody saying names over and over and over and over is not a Dirk Gently method of solving something. It's an interconnectedness to follow, and that's how he solves it. Dirk wouldn't do that.
Well, I know, but he did. That's what he was doing. That's what he was doing.
Well, that's why the book never got finished.
Why would the voice be taught? Why would the voice in the background be repeating
I know
names
that's
if
what he would be doing, but it's out of character.
You're right. It is out of character. But
that's all I'm saying, is that it's not something Dirk would do. Yes, it is obviously what he is doing what he's doing, but I don't know why he's doing it.
I know. Well, none of it makes sense. I mean, the whole book doesn't make sense, so why doesn't this part make even less sense?
All right, so I'm going to pick up where I left off.
Okay.
A woman named Melinda walks into Dirk's office for her appointment to have Dirk find her sort of lost cat.
Mm-hmm.
Dirk says he does not find lost cats and asks her to leave. Right. She demands to keep her appointment and brings in a basket with her cat, which is only half there. Meaning there's the front half of a cat, but there's no back half of the cat. And the cat doesn't seem to know the difference.
He's just walking around with a fluffy butt that doesn't exist.
Yes, right. She tells Dirk that the cat's name is Gusty, short for Gusty Winds. There is a front half that ends in a cloudy gray band at the waist. Dirk turned down the case on the basis of not knowing what he would do if he found the back half. And during this conversation, she does this joke that I really liked, which was the difference between respectable and respected.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, lady, this is a respectable business. And she's like, respectable or respected? And he was all thrown off, and he was like, well, what do you mean? Well, there's something clearly different between something that's inflatable and already inflated. So just because your business can be respectable doesn't mean it is respected.
Right.
And then, because he can't help himself, during the meeting, Thor, who was living with Kate Schechter, called Dirk to remind him that he was to meet them for tea.
Mm-hmm.
So Thor gets just thrown into this.
Yep. He's still hanging out with Kate.
So in chapter 3, Dirk arrives for tea, but Thor is not there. He has a conversation with Kate where he finds out and writes down many of his personality traits that he did not realize he had.
Mm-hmm.
So his little discussion with Kate was
cathartic.
A lot of revelations for him, yeah.
Yes, exactly.
So he explains to Kate about the case he turned down to search for the back half of a cat. In hindsight, he would normally have taken that sort of case. he determined that circumstances were just right for him to turn it down and think they may have been manufactured. He also explained that business has been so slow he tried calling himself to make sure the phone was working. And when he called himself, he answered. So now we're getting really weird. In this chapter, it almost sounds like he is discovering that he is setting himself up from another dimension or another universe, because somebody has to know him inside and out to know all of his little quirks and what he will do and won't do, that he's being set up somehow.
Right. Because he mentions that when he does look for information about the potential client's name and phone number, he finds a piece of paper where her name is written, which happens to be Smith, and the rest of it, which had the phone number on it, has been torn away and gone forever.
Yes. Chapter 4. So one thing Dirk passionately avoids is opening his own bank statements. Opening other people's are fine, but not his. He eventually opens some bank statements that he had been avoiding, and while he's doing this, in the background, there are names being intoned in the room around him by a computer that's reading baby names from a text file.
Yes. And here is where he is trying to determine the name of the dog, which is also in the room, with this computer voice spitting out baby names from this text file list. Right.
And he is making a lot of assumptions that
I mean,
I am not
you're
fond
absolutely
of.
Correct. Yes. So your objection was that
Dirk's method of figuring things out isn't to set up a computer to read names.
Correct.
First of all, why does he believe that the dog's name being read in monotone on a text file by a computer is going to make the dog react? If the dog reacts to something else that may be outside of the name reading, like he hears something outside, will he assume that's the dog's name because it reacted just at the moment of that name?
Right.
Why does he believe that the dog has a person's name? Not all pets are named people names. And even though I do have 2 pets that have people names, we are not fans of people named pets.
Right.
We have 2 pets that really don't have people names.
Yep.
So we're 50-50 here. You're 1 for 1 at your house.
That's right. We're 1 for 1 here at our house. Yep. You're right. It does seem uncharacteristic for a Dirk Gently method of detection.
Anyway, he eventually opens these statements, and he was looking or expecting to see a negative number in the amount that was overdrawn, but instead he discovers that he's got a sizable credit balance. And upon investigation, he notices in the last 7 weeks, 7 similar totals were transferred to his account via international bank transfer. And Dirk had to investigate their source. All he could figure out is that they came from the United States.
Right. And he figures that out by looking through old magazines and determining the exchange rate, which helps him determine that that's where the money was coming from.
Right. This discovery made Dirk want to celebrate by eating. And he started eating a pizza from the refrigerator until he remembered that he was not the one that put the pizza in there. He called the pizza place to find out who may have ordered a pizza they lovingly named the Gastriciana. And he was told that he was the only one that ever ordered that combination. Oh, and I didn't even write down the combination. Did you write down the combination?
Oh, I did not. It had eggs and anchovies and sounded horrible.
Yeah. So now we've got a strange pizza in his refrigerator that he didn't order. That was the exact pizza that he always orders.
Right. Which he had sworn off, so he said he was never going to eat it again because it always gave him indigestion. And he had indigestion right before he met with this potential client.
Right.
The puzzle seems to be twisted around again.
So on the radio, there was news that caught Dirk's attention. The news was about the Tottlepip meteor and the possibility of it hitting Earth. There was also a piece on teaching kangaroos to talk. Deciding that if he was being paid, he had to work. And Dirk did the only thing he could do and randomly picked someone to follow.
Right.
It had been a while since he followed anybody, so he was a little bit rusty at it at first.
Right.
In fact, he once even bumped into the person that he was following.
And then he hopped on a bus, and then he was embarrassed, so he jumped off the bus, and to his amazement, there was the guy he was supposed to be tailing in front of him.
Yes. He was apparently a ginger-haired actor because of the lack of job and his reading material.
Right.
And because of the reading material, at the end of the day, he got home and he realized that the dog's name was Kierkegaard.
Happened to be a person's name. Isn't that coincidental?
But I doubt if it's in the baby name book.
Oh, not too many babies named Kierkegaard these days.
No, not in the United States.
But that happened to be what the author who died in the bungee jumping accident had been studying and writing about.
Yeah.
So,
They're doing research and writing on Kierkegaard. And most authors name their pets after their subject so they have something to yell at. And that he explains in chapter 5. So he ends chapter 5 with his favorite joke of asking the meaning of ineffable and having someone say, I don't know.
Yes, one of our favorite words.
In chapter 6, he starts this chapter with another name for rain, Stanley.
A common theme seems to be occurring.
Yes. So Dirk followed the actor again. While he was waiting for the actor to leave his house, Dirk read his horoscope, which told him that he would meet a 3-ton rhinoceros called Desmond. Now, I do know that he has that person that works at the newspaper who does the horoscopes that likes to mess with him.
Right.
But how would he know about the 3-ton rhinoceros named Desmond?
Well, we're supposed to believe at this moment that it was a random act of unkindness by the author.
So he just put that out there, and in fact, it's going to end up coming true.
Well, yes and no. Desmond is no longer alive by the time he would have gotten to Los Angeles. Unless, of course, he met him in the past, which I suppose is a possibility. But he did say it was going to be today, so which past is it?
Right.
Oh.
The actor left his house and got into a cab. Dirk jumped into another cab and said, "Follow that cab." So this cabbie was amazed that this is the first time anybody ever said that to him, because according to TV and the movies, it is said all the time.
Right.
And since he's never been asked before, his fear was that he was the one that all the other cabbies were following.
Logical assumption, right?
Yes. So the first time that I read this in this book, it was not the first time I heard this.
Oh, right. I remember you saying that.
And I want to know what it's from. And I can't find it. It wasn't in the beginning of this book, like in one of his speeches, because I could search a text file that I have. Was it overly familiar to you, or was it the first time you had heard it?
It was familiar to me, and I don't know why. But I don't remember whether it was related to a taxi. No. It was familiar.
Could it have been in that horrible
6th book?
Scarrow production radio show that was fan fiction by that other, where they were at a fan convention? I
think it was, or I think it could have been. This might have been one of those phrases that the 6th book guy, Coffer, pulled out.
I text searched the PDF of his book, and Cabby does not. It wasn't in his book.
No, he never got into taxi there that I'm aware of. No, I don't know why it's so familiar, Jeff. But you're right, it is familiar. For some reason, when I think of that story, and you're saying it's familiar, I don't remember it being about a taxi driver. But I remember that concept of...
But it had to be about a taxi driver.
Yeah, that's true. It did have to be. Okay. No, I don't remember any other sequence in any other thing other than maybe the fan fiction where there's a taxi involved.
If anybody out there who's listening to this has heard the cabbie following cabbies joke by Douglas Adams and knows what other radio show or TV show or interview he did where he talked about it, let me know so I can sleep better at night, not trying to figure it out.
You bet.
So during the cab ride, this cabbie kept talking. And one of the things that he wondered about is if they teach kangaroos language, what will they talk about? which is really kind of a interesting thought. You know, right. You can teach a kangaroo to talk, but what are you going to talk about?
Right. It's like the bird language of when Arthur learns to fly and he figures out they don't have much to talk about.
It's all velocity and updraft and aerodynamics.
Oh, gosh.
So Dirk was afraid that he was going to lose the other cab because the cabbie really wasn't paying that much attention. Mm-hmm. And the cabbie explained that he'll probably get to where they're going before they do. Right. And Dirk could not possibly figure out how that was true. And he said that it was because they were going to Heathrow, and he explained all of the signs and the signals that told him that they were going to Heathrow. And that you had to be a cabbie to know.
Right.
And for whatever reason, I think that's true. I mean...
Yeah, I can definitely imagine that is true.
And then he ends this thing with a sentence that the cabbie said, which is pretty profound, which is, what you notice depends on who you are. Mm-hmm. All right, chapter 7. So Dirk boards a plane with the understanding that the actor he was following was on that plane without actually seeing him get on that plane. There's another kind of mistake. I don't see Dirk just doing that. But they do say that whoever set him up knows him inside and out and knows the best way to get him to follow what they want him to do.
Exactly.
On the plane, he found in his bag an open courier envelope with a book inside titled Advanced Surveillance Techniques. It was a book he received an advertising flyer for the other morning and crumpled it up and threw it away. But that exact, now flattened out flyer was in the book with Bon Voyage written on it in a very familiar handwriting. So once again, Dirk is manufacturing things to create himself to do things.
Oh, sounds like an infinite loop to me.
So one of the main things I had trouble with in this book is there are some inconsistencies. So right now, here at the end of chapter 7, what confuses me, in all but one instance, it talks about Dirk being on a plane to Chicago.
Right.
But there's one time on the plane when Dirk is contemplating looking for the man that he was following. So He's on the plane. He never saw the guy actually get on the plane. And he was thinking about getting up and wandering around the plane to look for the guy. And because he was flying business class, he could check business class and coach, but he was not able to go up into the first class cabin.
Right.
But he said something like, well, I'll have time. He can't go anywhere. And it's an 11-hour flight to Los Angeles. And I'm thinking, Los Angeles? You're on a plane to Chicago. Why are you talking about Los Angeles?
Right. And the other little bit of inconsistency here, I think he's made the assumption that the gentleman he's following is an actor.
Right.
Which, as an actor, it would kind of make sense that he would be flying to Los Angeles.
Right.
So, that had a consistency to it. So in the airport, we kind of get the feeling he's going towards Los Angeles, but clearly on the plane, within one paragraph, he's flying to Los Angeles and then Chicago.
Right, yes.
Oh, man. It's weird. The other inconsistency I wondered about is I really thought at the beginning of chapter 7, he said something about leaving his passport in his other jacket. And then he just hops a plane to Chicago.
Right. Yeah.
I thought I remember reading that. I'm like, wait a minute. Didn't he just say his passport was in his other jacket?
It says, Dirk had read through the small collection of newspapers he'd brought with him twice and checked through the contents of his wallet and pockets several times. The usual collection of business cards for people he had no recollection of meeting, unidentifiable phone numbers on scraps of paper, credit cards, checkbook, his passport. He suddenly remembered that he had it left in another jacket. So, yeah.
So he doesn't have it with him at the airport. Anyway,
yeah.
Maybe back then you could fly without it. I don't know. Doesn't make sense
Not
to me. But
international.
I wouldn't think so. I thought I was hallucinating, honestly, because, I mean, those kind of inconsistencies, they could have easily fixed in the book, but this is just slapped together, so.
Right. So then we get to chapter 8, which adds to the confusion a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
At the beginning of this chapter, it is actually set in Los Angeles.
Right.
But he's not there.
Nope.
Something else is happening in Los Angeles at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And since these are multiple versions of the same story that went from Dirk to Hitchhiker to Dirk, I'm guessing that that's how all of this stuff got confused.
Right.
But chapter 8, to me, set in Los Angeles or not, was a phenomenal chapter.
Mm-hmm.
It seems out of place because Dirk is not really in Los Angeles, but it's making it sound like it is something that he's observing.
Mm-hmm.
This is an observation for the reader, but we don't know what this observation or who's doing the observing, unless it's another Dirk.
Well, and it's definitely written in a different style than the other chapters, because we have an interplay with the author that we don't have in any of the other chapters of the book.
Right. So this isn't exactly what he wrote, but this is my attempt at paraphrasing this beginning of the chapter. Mm-hmm. And if you've got more to say and add after this, it'll be great.
Okay.
It says, under a beautiful blue sky, a beautiful woman wearing beautiful blue clothes was driving a beautiful blue convertible. She was driving through a perfect neighborhood full of beautiful houses. As she was stopped at a red light, a small, dark-haired man approached her, put a gun to her head, told her to exit the car, and he stole it. Mm-hmm. Now a pedestrian, she tried to flag down passing cars, but none would stop for her.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And here's how the chapter ends. Exactly. Another perfect crime, another perfect day in the city of angels, and only one tiny little lie. Forgive me. What was the lie? So in this thing, and to help, I'm going to give you another excerpt from the chapter to, I think, figuring out what the lie was.
Mm-hmm.
I would tell you about what she wore, but I'm very bad at clothes. And if I started telling you it was an Armani this or a what's-her-name Fari that, you would know instinctively that I was faking it. And since you are taking the trouble to read what I have written, I intend to treat you with respect, even if I do occasionally, and in a friendly and well-meaning kind of way, lie to you. So I'll just say that the clothes she was wearing were exactly the sort of clothes that someone who knew vastly more about clothes than I do would admire enormously, and were blue.
Oh, gosh.
He's breaking the fourth wall.
Oh, yeah, right. And that's what I meant about the written style. And it's almost like this chapter was written for an editor, so that he could piece together the story and go back in and do some fixing on there. And he even talks about the gun that's pointed at the gal, about his ignorance of weapons, and he couldn't tell a Walter PPK from a Derringer or whatever.
Right.
So there's a lot of fourth wall stuff here, and it's definitely in a different style. than the rest of the chapters that are in the book. In addition to what you were saying before, there's a definite inconsistency here with the way this chapter ends to one of the chapters that we're about to get into.
Right. And I do want to read another excerpt just because there's something important.
Great.
She tried to wave down one or two of the other cars on the road, but they maneuvered politely past her. One of them was an open-topped Mustang with the radio playing loudly. I'd love to be able to say that it was tuned to an oldie station and that the words, "How does it feel? How does it feel?" snarled out at this moment. Or am I supposed to say, "How does it feel?"
Oh, please don't.
How does it feel to be on your own?
Yeah, this is one of those definite inside jokes. He's a writer. He could have said that happened. He didn't have to apologize and tell us it didn't happen.
Right.
But that's so Douglas Adams that we expect that kind of humor.
But he said there are limits even to fiction. It was an oldie station, but the oldie song it was playing was Sunday Girl by Blondie.
Right. And I think that's the lie.
Oh, yeah. Well, kind of, because it wasn't even remotely appropriate, seeing that this was a Thursday.
Right. And it is another Thursday. Yeah, that's an important part.
It is. Or was it a lie?
Uh-huh. Oh my gosh. What a great chapter.
So every once in a while I read something that makes me think this is very, very important, but I have no idea why I think it is important or what about it makes me think it's supposed to be important, other than the fact that it confuses me. And that's what this chapter was. This chapter just screamed of importance. As if you could understand this chapter, you will understand the rest of the book. Chapter 9. Back in England, he describes an old, ugly, run-down estate, Ranting Manor. Not much is left there other than a small zoo and a business park with one American computer games company. Then there is this edited excerpt. At about 10:30 in the evening, which would make it roughly the same time that the car was being stolen on Sunset Boulevard, a small perimeter gate squeaked open. The figures of, respectively, a large dog and a small man slipped in through the side gate. Both walked with a pronounced limp. So the dog had a natural limp and the man had a limp because he had a prosthetic leg that was 1 inch too long. And I liked this visual description. The two shadowy figures limped their way in unison along the driveway, resembling, from a distance, a child's pulling toy with a couple of off-center wheels. So now they're back in England, and they're at a zoo, and at the exact time the car was being stolen on Sunset Boulevard, this dog and a man walk into the zoo. Wow, I mean, it's just coming from everywhere. So other than the normal sparse collection of animals at the zoo, there was one temporary guest named Desmond. The man and his dog walk through the zoo and near the front entrance sees Desmond's keeper's residence, and the gate to it was standing open. So they investigate. The keeper was slumped over the kitchen table after a night of partying. Desmond was out of sorts because of strange, unfamiliar smells. The remainder of this chapter is describing Desmond's perceptions of what is happening around him. I am not sure exactly what was happening. It sounds like he escaped his cage and was being pursued to be recaptured. The chapter ends with the sounds Desmond heard. Sounds like these. Get the paramedics. Get the police. Not just Malibu, get the LAPD. Now, tell them to get the helicopter up here. We got dead and wounded. And tell them, I don't know how they're going to deal with this, but tell them we got a dead rhinoceros in the swimming pool.
Okay.
So, Desmond heard they've got a dead rhinoceros in the swimming pool. Then he couldn't be the rhinoceros in the swimming pool.
Okay, so I think this confused me too, because Ranting Manor is back in England.
Yes.
Pride of Oxfordshire.
Yes.
Right.
Like I said, at the beginning of this chapter, they're back in England.
Right, exactly.
And now they want the LAPD.
Right, exactly. Apparently, this rhinoceros traveled through space-time and ended up in a swimming pool in Malibu from Oxford.
Okay, so it teleported.
Well, I guess it says that because that's where the dead body is. But
Right.
we don't know that, and apparently that's going to be part of what we learn in the future.
Right.
Because that's how this rhinoceros apparently is able to at least spatially shift somehow.
Right.
Weird.
So, Chapter 10. Dirk lands in Chicago, and even though he knows the guy he was following is not on the plane, he waits at the exit to make sure. He is paged, and he is told to go to the information desk, where he is immediately given a ticket for Albuquerque.
Albuquerque.
Upon landing in Albuquerque, Dirk quickly discovered the next person to follow, a large, sweaty man in a black suit. He also happened to be holding a sign that read D. Gentry, Gentry.
Uh-huh.
The man pulled up in an old, well-worn Cadillac that the client knew Dirk would enjoy. Dirk was told that the client, like Dirk, was Australian. He could tell by the accent.
Yep, he kept telling him he was from Australia, then New Zealand,
Yeah.
and not from England, but just it's funny.
Dirk's conversation with his driver, Joe, was about all the Californians moving to Santa Fe and ruining it.
Mm-hmm.
And Joe said he has lived in Santa Fe for over a year now, but it seems like forever. And Dirk asked him where he was previously, and Joe said, California. He left after his sister was hit in a drive-by shooting, and the car that drove by was a dark blue Mercedes SEL.
Right.
So now
Right.
we are guessing that is the same blue Mercedes that was stolen.
Right. The car got stolen, and that's when he mentions that his sister was killed by the occupants of the car who had a Kalashnikov.
Right.
So here, the author knows his guns.
Yes. But his sister was hit in the drive-by shooting a year previous.
Yeah.
He left California after
Right.
his sister was hit in a drive-by shooting, and he's been in Santa Fe for over a year. So this isn't a recent thing, but the timeline is going to get all whacked out here. He loves doing this time travel stuff.
Oh, this is definitely a time travel story. Time and space are being messed with here.
Right. So as they're driving, Dirk sees a yellow sign that reads, Gusty winds may exist. And he asks Joe who put the sign there. And Joe told him the State Highway Authority. And Dirk was disappointed that this was a normal road sign. However, he thinks he remembers Joe slowing the car, and he wanted to know if that was so Joe made sure that he saw the sign. And Joe said he was slowing down for the rhinoceros.
Which is a replacement rhinoceros.
Right.
Which we assume, but now I'm confused as to why the rhinoceros was in Santa Fe going to California, because the original rhinoceros was in London but died in Malibu.
Right. So the last chapter that we have is chapter 11, and it starts with Joe saying that he was held up at the airport by the rhinoceros earlier.
Right.
And this is where he tells him it's the replacement rhinoceros because the other one died at a party.
Mm-hmm.
And Dirk, not ever wanting to ask questions to which he did not already know the answer, could not ask and decided to take a look for himself instead.
Mm-hmm.
So Dirk goes up to the driver of the truck with the cage and starts a conversation about rhinos making poor party guests. The driver said he wouldn't call the rhino a guest and explained the events leading up to the dead rhino in the pool.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we end, folks. That's all we have.
A dead
And
rhino
somehow,
in a swimming
some
pool.
way, all of this is going to coalesce and make sense.
Okay. Well, now I think, Jeff, it might help our dear listeners if we go back to the original editor's note for the beginning of this book and read a small part that describes this part of the book. So what do you think? Should we read it? Or do you have a paraphrase you'd like to go?
Well, I've got a paraphrase, but if you would like to read what is in the editor's note at the beginning of the book, you can certainly do that.
All right. So it says here on page 8 of the editor's note at the beginning of The Salmon of Doubt, folders refer to the novel as The Salmon of Doubt and fall into 3 categories, from oldest to most recent. They are The Old Salmon, The Salmon of Doubt, and L.A. Rhino Ranting Manor. Reading through these various versions, I decided that for the purposes of this book, Douglas would be best served if I stitched together the strongest material, regardless of when it was written, much as I might have proposed doing were he still alive. So from The Old Salmon, I reinstated what is now the first chapter on Dave's Land.
Okay.
The following 6 chapters comes intact from the second and longest continuous section, The Salmon of Doubt. Then, with an eye to keeping the storyline clear, I dropped in 2 of his 3 most recent chapters from L.A. Rhino Ranting Manor, which becomes chapters 8 and 9. And for chapter 10, I went back to the last chapter from The Salmon of Doubt, then concluded with the final chapter from Douglas's most recent work from L.A. Rhino Ranting Manor, to give the reader a sense of what Douglas planned for the rest of the novel. I preceded this with the facts from Douglas to his London editor, Sue Freestone, who worked closely with Douglas on his books from the very first. So we can definitely see the stitched together nature of these chapters and why there might be some confusion. And
right.
Of course, the editor here does not say he edited anything for content. He simply brought the information together.
Right. So that could have some of the inconsistencies explained. Also, he's doing a time travel teleportation story, which just always adds to the inconsistencies. And then it's only on your second reading, after you know the end, when all of that makes sense.
Right, right. And this is what we were talking about before when we were talking about authors' motivations and how they might write a story. We don't really know how Douglas Adams wrote a story other than usually in his bathtub.
Right, right.
But for me, I would think I would have to start off with some kind of a skeleton, that said, this is the basic elements of the plot where this happens and that happens and this happens and that happens and this happens and then it echoes back to here. Maybe he was that brilliant that he could keep all that in his mind while he was writing. But I certainly wouldn't have been able to do anything like that.
Well, we know he doesn't keep everything because he forgot about the bananas on all the plates.
That's 100% true. How could you forget about a banana?
I don't know.
Oh my gosh, Jeff. This was certainly an interesting read, and it does dips our toes back into the writing of Douglas Adams. And I agree with you. Chapter 8 is a brilliantly written chapter, the kind of chapter we enjoy because we're listening to his thoughts as they seem to be blooming from his mind. And we like that.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, Jeff. So we've reached the end of The Salmon of Doubt. What are we going to do next?
Well, I think that the best thing to do is to just stay with the Dirk Gently theme and explore everything else, like the radio shows, the TV shows, and the comic books.
Yes, I'm convinced that if for some reason in my head, I think the beginning of this Salmon of Doubt book echoes very loudly to me about one of the TV shows. But
all right.
We'll see when we get there. But the next thing we do is the radio show, right?
Yes, we're going to do the first radio dramatization of the first book, Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency.
Fantastic.
And if you're wondering how doing Dirk Gently novels applies to a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy podcast, well, it's due to the fundamental interconnectedness of all things.
Thanks, Dirk.
Yes. Well, now that we know what we're doing next time, I have to say this is the end. Thank you for listening to this. A new episode is released on the first Thursday of every month. A special thank you goes out to Luke, Max, Greg, and Tim Lesnick for arranging and performing our opening theme. Visit our website at digitalwatchesareaprettynneatidea.buzzsprout.com. While there, you can find links to all of my Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy inspired t-shirt designs. You can contact us via email at digitalwatchespodcast@gmail.com. You can find us on YouTube and Facebook at Digital Watches Are a Pretty Neat Idea. You can message us on Twitter, or should I say X, at Watches Idea. And our Instagram is Watches Idea Podcast.
This has been a Froods for Thought production.